Dear people, welcome back here in Brussels. Where Anita was, there is now Annelou from Egmond. You're the vice president of ALDE. You were responsible for the campaign last year for the European elections. You do a lot more in ALDE. ALDE Renew, so there's the Renew group in the European Parliament. There's ALDE, that's the umbrella organization of European liberal parties. What again is the difference between the two?
Well, ALDE is an organization of parties in Europe who are either liberal or democratic, or liberal democrats or social liberals, and not just parties in countries in the EU. There's also a lot of member parties who are actually in countries that are part of Europe but not part of the EU. But all the parties that are member of ALDE who are situated in the EU also contribute to the Renew group.
Okay, so that's it's bigger but also smaller. As a vice president, what do you do on a daily basis?
Basically, you can do anything you want, but the topics that I am working on right now are, for instance, the European Women's Academy, a very important training that we have developed over the years for future female political leaders in Europe. We're doing incredibly well. We have alumni who have been ministers, who have become members of the European Parliament, members of their own parliament. And another thing, I am also a rapporteur on Estonia.
And that I'm one of the few men on the stage today. And most of the politicians on stage today are powerful women. There's Sophie, there's Sigrid, there's you, there's Anita. Is that a coincidence?
I don't think so.
What is your secret?
You know, we're really good at what we do.
But do liberal parties attract powerful women, or do liberal parties create powerful women?
I would hope both. The European Women's Academy is actually one of these efforts to see that there's women who are active in a political party, but who somehow are running against this sort of problem where they can't promote, they can't get into the senior levels, and that's one of the things we want to do, because there's. When you look at the entry level, there's plenty of women, but then when you go up, we see that the number of men increases and the number of women decreases.
Yes. When we talk about the senior level, the two women you're going to interview today, but I think for members of D66, they barely need an introduction. But Cecilia Malmström, how important is she?
She's a powerhouse. She's been a cabinet minister in her own country, in Sweden. She was a European Commissioner, first for Home Affairs and later for Trade. And presently, she's actually in the running to become the Secretary General for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development.
Yeah. And Sigrid Kaag, they're here.
Yeah.
Sigrid Kaag, we know she's the newly elected leader of D66. Still, congratulations. Remind us, what is her international state of affairs?
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes because, again, another powerhouse. She was a diplomat for many, many years, and in the end, an Undersecretary General for the United Nations. And she oversaw that, in that capacity, the detection and the destruction of chemical weapons in Syria.
Okay. Well, you're going to interview them. What do you want to know from them?
Well, you know, they have a lot in common, but today we're going to talk about trade mostly, and trade in relationship to Corona.
Okay, Annelou, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Of course, I'm going to start with Cecilia because she's our guest, and one of the things you have been fighting for is multilateral cooperation when it comes to trade. Here in these days of Corona, we see that there's a fight for anything that's available around the world, and many countries would be tempted to go it alone. And maybe you could tell us why it's still so very important to work with multilateral cooperation in international trade.
Well, hello, Annelou and everybody. It's an honor to be with you today, this afternoon from Sweden. Well, we have seen, and it actually started before the COVID crisis, an increased nationalism, protectionism, closing of border, and an erosion of multilateralism and the liberal world order that we created, the Europeans and the Americans, after the Second World War. And that is very damaging. And we need to repair that, and especially in trade, where WTO has lost its importance and has had difficulties making decisions, showing its role in a world where we are trading in a different way as we did in 25 years ago. This needs to be repaired. I know that Europe and many other allies are really trying to push there, but of course, without the engagement of the US and China, who are violating the rules of WTO, it would be very hard to repair. But hopefully there will soon be a new Secretary General, a woman, because there are two women in the last race, and that's a good thing. And together she, with constructive countries, Europe and other like-minded and allies, can start reforming and showing that WTO is still up to it. Because closing borders, protectionism, isolation will not do. And I think this crisis has shown that more than ever.
Yeah, definitely. Sigrid, one of the pillars on the liberalism is free trade. And how do we prevent this focus on free trade to sort of raise the prices of everything that we're scrambling for all around the world? How do we still keep it open and fair?
Yeah, well, I think, yes, there's often been a confusion when you speak about free trade. For D66 and certainly myself, we are always talking about free, inclusive and fair trade. And that's very different. That means we're not talking about a race to the... We're talking about quality. We're talking fair labor conditions, fair and living wage for those who produce it, safe labor conditions, and value through the entire chain. This is what international, open, free, fair, inclusive trade is supposed to be about. And as Europe, we need to be standard bearers and standard setters. This is why, from my perspective, future trade agreements, certainly, but also CETA, offer that bridge to be both a political champion, to set standards, to help apply them, use the WTO as a forum through which we sort of set the rules, but from a European Union and trade agreements, we can actually lever the change. And the corona crisis actually offers this tremendous strategic opportunity, as it is, in crisis, to reset the way we produce, how we consume, but also really engage and ensure that responsible business conduct becomes the norm and not the deviation. And this is different from excluding businesses or other shareholders from the conversation. They have a responsibility, they need to live up to it, but we need to provide the platform and set the standard. So there's a tremendous opportunity to work differently. The anxiety around corona and trade, and of course the disruption in the supply chains, certainly from the start, and the lack of availability of important commodities such as personal protective equipment, the PPE, or medicine, has also demonstrated we've become too dependent on one or two source countries, be it China or India. We need to strategically reorient ourselves. And again, here we can only do this effectively at a European level. The nationalist agenda that Cecilia rightly put away, the populist agenda, pretending as if we can go it alone, solve it at a national level, is just absolutely ludicrous. But we need to demonstrate at a European level we're fit for purpose, we've got the direction and we have the vision and the investments to make this happen. This is not going to be happening overnight, but we need to declare it and have the political will. And I think there is a lot being garnered or organized around this. We are certainly willing, I am willing for D66 with other social liberal parties to be really front runners in this, and we already are, but we need to make sure we bring others along and do not allow them to fall back on the conservative reflex, which is a normal nature of mankind sometimes, particularly in crisis. Protect as opposed to protect, but open and strengthen.
Yeah, but working together and discussing these things and coming to a set standard, that takes a lot of time. Do we have this time in Corona days when we are, we can't wait for a vaccine, or we can't wait for solutions, and discussing on a multilateral level takes forever. I could understand how people could become sort of anxious that we don't have time for this right now. Cecilia, how do you feel about that?
Well, what's the alternative? I mean, the alternative is that we everybody focus on itself, and that can be like a very short-term solution, but it's not sustainable. And I fully agree with what Sigrid said on the beginning of this crisis, when there was a shortage of critical equipment. But overall, during this crisis, we have had food in our stores, we've had equipment, global value chains have worked. And what we need to do now is to make sure that we perfectionize them, and many companies have already started to diversify a little bit their value chains and to seek more flexibility. And that is a logical thing to do. And that has happened since many months already, and that will continue as well. Europe, of course, needs to look after its own house, but that does not mean closing Europe. We still need to trade, we still need to engage, we still need to keep on working on the reforming the multilateral rules with others. And here we can only hope that in a couple of weeks there will be a more constructive transatlantic cooperation on this, so that we can really sit together and see how can we modernize institutions. WHO is the most urgent, but plenty others of them, in T7, G20, they haven't worked either during the crisis. So there is a momentum where we can really see that, okay, how can we do better in the future? Because there will be a new pandemic or a new crisis.
Yeah. Sigrid, you mentioned the shortage of PPE, the shortage of medicine, and the fact that we have been very much relying on either China or India for many of these articles. Is there a role for the EU to start producing this amongst ourselves, and how to make sure that if, say, one of our EU members is going to produce these goods, that it's going to be available for everybody?
Well, there are two levels in a way. Usually from a good crisis management, one knows one is always ready for the next, one is ready for today's crisis sort of in future, but the next crisis will not be the same. So that's sort of pandemic lesson, sadly, not 101. And therefore we need to work on contingencies. And yes, we need to have strategic autonomy in terms of goods such as PPE, but not only. Maybe a future virus will have a totally different impact and we need different materials. So you can't just linearly plan. But strategic autonomy, having certain sectors strengthened again to be able to produce in key areas is important, and we're working towards that. However, the next step is, as Cecilia mentioned, that we keep supply chains open, that we have international agreement on public goods. Healthcare, access to vaccines, medicine is a global public good. We have the WHO, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. These are agreements we've entered into, organizations and agreements. We need to make sure precisely to work internationally and multilaterally that we can build to have availability for all. This requires knowledge sharing, which has happened in this pandemic through research around the vaccine, commodity sharing, and solidarity. This is not a cheap slogan. Solidarity is a political choice. It's a matter of investing in the stability and safety of others. Europe at the start, at the forefront, but with others. So I don't think it's an either or. And yes, we are investing, allowing certain companies in certain sectors to sort of build up again, but you can't work towards a total reorientation of the global economy. This is neither workable, not realistic, and you cause more harm than good. What we need to do is what I mentioned before, is focus on quality, availability, and value in the chain. And this requires, again, international cooperation. And I agree with Cecilia. I remember from all her long discussions and flights she had to make to DC, very arduous, sometimes only incremental progress, but multilateralism is not a luxury. It's actually essential, particularly in these volatile times. It's the only way we can survive and we can actually come out of this stronger and differently.
Yeah. Cecilia, you mentioned you in sort of an optimistic way that who knows, maybe in a couple of weeks there will be a new political leader in the US. But is there also a scenario for where we have to face the same political leader for the next couple of years? And what does that mean for international trade?
Well, obviously, it's the American people choosing their presidents, and whoever it is, we have to work with that person in that administration. It could be easier in some regards with one and easier with others. But we have to plan for two scenarios, and I hope that the EU is doing that right now. And we need to start identifying concrete areas where we can rebuild that trust that has been quite hurt the last year, and see what can we do to facilitate trade between us. It could be quite technical, but still it's a good thing for business on both sides. We can also work with, there's so many other Americans outside the White House where we can start building, and I know that there's immense work going on the Sustainable Development Goals, working with states in the US. There are lots of people in the Congress, in academia, in business, in the States, as I said, who want to work with Europe. And we need to sort of try to formulate a positive agenda maybe limited to start with, but to slowly build up that trust. Of course, we would love the Americans to work with us to reform international organizations such as the WHO and to be, see Europe as a friend and an ally. We used to be. We don't always agree with the Americans, of course not. But basically, we are friends and allies. And I think these last years have been painful in many ways. So hopefully we can find a way out of this. But we need to make sure that the European Union acts in a united way so that they can't pick and choose, because that has hurt our relations with the US and also with China.
Okay, well, I'm so sorry to say, but we have come already to the end of this. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours on this topic, but I would really, really want to thank you both for joining us, be it online, and for sharing your knowledge with us on this important topic. Thank you very much.